Hello again. Sometimes one comes across stories relating to race which sound like spoofs, which somebody might have posted on the internet as an April Fool's Day prank. Such a case is the incident at the University of Southern California. This took place during a course on business communications as part of the process of acquiring an MBA, that is to say, a Master's of Business Administration. This is a graduate course. Um, that is to say, it's for those who already hold a degree. It's a master's. It's important to remember this for the students there are not silly school pupils, but rather university graduates. Professor Greg Patton was teaching a course about the importance of clear communication and avoiding filler words such as like, right, you know, and so on. After all, if a businessman is making a pitch to a client, it wouldn't be a good look if he were to start by saying, right, well, like, yeah, well, yeah? In other words, Professor Patton was teaching about crisp and professional presentation as it relates to language. A most valuable subject for business people, as I am sure we would all agree. Because he had lived and worked in Shanghai for some years, the professor enlivened the lecture by talking about filler words in other languages, and he gave us an example. He flashed up on the screen a Chinese ideogram for the word that, and explained that in Mandarin Chinese, instead of people saying like, well, right, they will instead say that, which is pronounced as nage. So instead of saying like and right, a Chinese speaker, when he's struggling to come up with new words, will say nage, like that. So far, there is nothing which any normal person could possibly have objected to, or so one might have thought. There were, however, a number of black students, and they thought that because the Chinese word for that sounds a bit like a well-known racial slur, that they should take offence, which they duly did. They wrote a letter to the dean of the university, saying, among other things, that we are burdened to fight with our existence in society, in the workplace, and in America. We should not be made to fight for our sense of peace and mental well-being here. And also that, in light of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the recent and continued collective protest and social awakening across the nation, we cannot let this stand. I'm sorry if I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at the idea of racism or the use of racial slurs. That particular racial slur is a word I've never spoken in the whole course of my life, by the way. The dean replied in a letter, "It is simply unacceptable for faculty to use words in class that can marginalise, hurt and harm the psychological safety of our students." Professor Patton repeated several times a Chinese word that sounds very similar to a vile racist slur in English. Understandably, this caused great pain and upset among students, and for that I am deeply sorry. To use an old expression, you couldn't make this up. It sounds like something from a satirical comedy, doesn't it? The reason that the professor has been in the habit of using that example is that there have always been a lot of Chinese students on the course, and he felt that this example made the session more interesting. It made it more relevant to his students. In other words, he was trying to tailor his lectures to the cultural background of those he was teaching. He said after the complaints had been made, the inclusion of other languages in the course is part of a deep and sustained effort at inclusion, as I have reached out to find and include many international, global, diverse, female, broad and inclusive leadership examples and illustrations to enhance communication and interpersonal skill in our global workplace. That sounds reasonable. Former Chinese students wrote letters of support for Professor Patton, who, as I say, lived and taught in China for some years. Yesterday, I talked a little about Cornell, which used to be one of the best universities in the United States and is now running courses on the connection between black holes and racism. This is the difficulty when you bend over backward to enrol African American students. Everything soon becomes about race and ethnicity. The course at the University of Southern California has been taught for years without any problems. The students who complained were not teenagers, they were graduate students who had already attended university and acquired one degree. Their chronological maturity, though, did not prevent them from bringing race into a course on business communications. This is not something which many Indian or Chinese students ever feel the need to do. Here's a question: who ultimately will be harmed by this kind of nonsense? The answer is the black students themselves. While everybody else on that course about business communication is learning about the importance of avoiding going and like, I mean to say, well, the African Americans are busy looking for a grudge which they can resent. They are, in this case, as is so often the case, the architects of their own misfortune.